we're very excited to hear about it.
Thank you very much, Janet. Thank you very much for coming. In retrospect, perhaps doing this the night before Rosh Hashanah was not necessarily the best choice, but I really appreciate the support from the library. I really appreciate the support from Adam Cavalcante, who invited me to participate in this, and it's a delight to be here. I am wearing a different hat today in that normally I talk to large numbers of students about international relations, and here I get to do a conversation about things that I absolutely love. Fiction has always been my first love. So I'm going to take you through my plan for the evening. I don't like to leave question and answers to the end because I don't think that's that much fun for the audience, and I don't do that with my students either. So what I plan to do is just talk to you a little bit about my journey to writing to begin with. Introduce my two books, the novel and the short story collection that I have out now, and give you an introduction to the novel by reading a short passage from the novel, from the introductory chapter, and then have an opportunity to have question and answer about that or anything to that point. Followed by an introduction to the short story collection songbook, a reading of a short story, and then another opportunity for a question and interaction. So that's my plan for the evening. I want to start off by thanking a few different people. In addition to the library and Autumn, as I've done, I have to thank my wife, Natalie, without whom nothing will ever get done. Without whose support for this endeavor of writing, which has taken a lot of my time, concentration, many nights, white nights where I was busy thinking and running to the washroom to write in my writer's notebook and disturbing her sleep. And so really, I owe everything to Natalie, and I'm very grateful to you. She also, as some of you have already started to see, has written her own play. And sometimes my writing and the journey of writing got in the way of that, and I really appreciate her support and indulgence all the way through. And also to my parents, I'll tell you a little bit about my journey to writing, and that goes through my father. My mother is my largest supporter, my biggest supporter, my most enthusiastic supporter, even more so than my wife, I would say. And I am very grateful to that. My children have been, my two daughters have indulged me as well, despite the fact that it may be embarrassing to have your father write and publish and be pictured in the library. Nonetheless, they are good-natured about it. So let me start by talking about why, after 9 academic books, boring, dry academic books that nobody reads, well, people in my field, but I've decided to write fiction. And I would say that, first of all, I didn't decide to write fiction, and it didn't decide to do that after 9 academic books. I've always loved fiction. It's been my first love, and I've always wanted to write something artistic rather than simply the dry theory and the dry history. I don't think my writing is dry, but some of my students may say otherwise. And I started at age 17. I actually started a novel to pursue this love of fiction. I wrote 4 chapters. I still have them now. Nothing I would ever write now, never want to write now. But the point is that I tried that at 17 and never got past that 4th chapter, and was kind of disappointed that I put it down and never picked that up again. My computer is a graveyard of short story ideas and short stories that I started and aborted. And truly, I've always wanted to write it, but it's only after writing academic books that I figured out how to write novels and short stories. Because I realized certain things about writing, like, for example, you don't have to write from page 1, from word 1 to word end. And that was liberating for me, because that's where I was getting stuck. And the way I write academically is, sometimes I have the material for a certain section. I plan things out. That's very important. Plan things out. I work on whatever I have the inspiration and the information for. And I realized that I could do that with fiction as well. And so that was very important. But my father, who was a very big influence on my life, and I was always very close to my father, and he taught me a lot about my approach to life, my values. He was, his final inspiration to me was about writing. And he was a pharmacist for many years. He always wanted to write satire, not the kind of things that I write, but he always wanted to write, except for one short story that I wrote for him. But he always wanted to write satire. He thought that The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was the greatest book ever written, and he wishes he had written that, and he wanted to write things like that. And when he was diagnosed with kidney cancer in 2019, even before the pandemic, I went in for his first 2 chemo treatments, and he was told that his immune system was very badly compromised and that he had to stay away from people. And he was really unhappy about that. And after the second treatment, he was complaining to me that he was just so bored. And I said, well, Dad, maybe now's the time to write that fiction. Maybe now's the time to write the satire that you wanted to write. And he looked at me, and it really broke my heart. But he said, Norrin, it's too damn late. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, I don't have the ideas that I had 20, 30 years ago. I don't have the ability to sit and think them through. I also don't even have the ability to sit in the position that I need to sit in. And he says, I should have done this decades ago. And that was something that stuck in my brain for a couple of years. It's not like I went out in December 2019 and decided I better do this myself, but it was bothering me that I always knew that when I retired, I would write fiction, and that I always wanted to do. And in the summer of 2021, I just had an idea for a short story, and we were at a cottage in Poconos, and I said, let's try this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to wait until it's too late. It would be a shame if I waited until it was too late and I didn't have the opportunity to do it. And so I wrote it, and it came, and then suddenly the ideas just kept on coming to me, and I just went with it. And I put other things to the side. I worked late at night. I mean, I tend to be very efficient with my time, and maybe for my family, annoyingly so. And I tend to work late hours when I'm inspired. And it ended up becoming 12 short stories, which eventually became this 14 short story collection. But after 12 of them, I had this idea that I really, really liked, that captured my imagination, and that was too big for a short story. And I thought that in order to do it justice, this might be a novel. And I wasn't sure that I had it in me. I wasn't sure that I had the ability to plan that through, map it through, but I did. I planned that through, wrote about 4 pages of detailed notes on that, and thought about how that would translate into a novel. And I just threw myself in, and this is the result of that. It is, I'll say one more thing about writing and why I decided after 9 academic books what I like about writing. I always wanted to be artistic, and in the academic work that I do, I'm very straightforward, very disciplined, but I love the idea of painters. I'll see a painting, and I told Natalie this when she asked me, well, why do you want to do this? For me, the idea of a magnificent painting, when an artist takes emotions, feelings, attitudes, moods from their head and puts it into someone else's head, through their ability to paint, which I have no ability to paint whatsoever. If you've seen my painting, it's just like, it's an abomination against God and man. But I could do that with writing. And I felt that I had that ability, and I hope I've succeeded in that. So let me tell you a little bit about The Oracle of Spring Garden Road. The idea of that novel is, I had this idea, and my ideas are simply, I don't choose what to write. It's sort of like in Harry Potter, the wand maker says that the wand chooses the wizard doesn't choose the wand. Well, that really is the case here. I don't set out to write a story about X. Instead, when some idea comes over me, usually a marriage of a character personality, in a situation, in a geographic space, geography is very important to me, come together, and it intrigues me. That is the beginning of the writing journey for me. And that's what happened here. I had this idea of a supremely intelligent, highly educated homeless man on the streets. And my question to myself was, oh, Why is he there? That was the first thing, and I was chewing on that for a few days as suddenly a character came to my mind and a story and a set of circumstances in some respects from my world too. So I discovered my own voice by putting myself and not myself in there, but what I know, what I've lived into the novel. I don't want to give away too much about it. The novel addresses two key questions, two key storylines. One of them is, how did he get there? How does this highly intelligent, why is this highly intelligent person, highly educated, he's got everything going for him, and he, he's got an intense knowledge of philosophy, he's brilliant, and yet he's on the streets living a miserable life. So what's that all about? The second question, or the second storyline is, after 20 years on the street, he decides that it's time to go back. It's time to re-engage with society for a variety of reasons. And he decides that he can do that with the help of this very kind, also intelligent woman who's befriended him, local woman who's befriended him. And the second storyline is he able to do that, or is it just simply too late after 20 years on the streets? And the way I've written this is in alternating past and present chapters. It starts off in the present, you've got alternating past and present chapters in rather dizzying fashion till you get to the tense part at the end where both storylines intersect. And I thought I'd read you part of the first chapter, most of the first chapter of that, to give you a flavor of what it's all about, and then give you an opportunity, your first opportunity to ask questions. So let me read you from chapter 1 of The Oracle of Spring Garden Road. Freedom. That's what it always felt like to him. Freedom. Freedom to do what he pleased, to follow his whims. Freedom to think his thoughts without submitting them for anyone's approval. Waking up each morning was like a divine gift to him, an opportunity to connect with the world on his own terms, beholden to nobody. He reported to no boss, had no rent or mortgage to pay, no car to maintain, no family to feed, no obligations. True, he had his habits, his routines, his rituals. He spent his weekday afternoons in his office, 2 squares of pavement in front of a bank on Spring Garden Road. The man needed to eat, didn't he? And he grudgingly frequented a local shelter in cold weather to avoid freezing on the streets. Aside from those concessions to necessity, though, he marched to his own beat. Rousseau declared, man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. Observing all that slunk around him, he couldn't help but agree. Take the bank manager, for example, the one who sneered at him every time she passed by, who viewed him as somehow less than human, a blight on the maritime landscape. She was perpetually scampering to and fro in fear of missing an appointment, a deadline, a daycare pickup, a permanent scowl plastered across her face in deference to her commitments, her responsibilities, the joyless requirements of her important life. Or the kind teller who often wished him a good afternoon and sometimes shyly, respectfully dropped a coin into his battered hat with a benevolent, embracing smile. He often heard her on her cell phone pleading with her elderly mother to be patient with her during the workday, not to expect her to visit until the evening, or arguing with her husband about car loans or the cost of orthodontics for their son. Or the owner of the dress boutique across the way, who had inherited the successful shop from his parents, but had neither the talent nor the inclination to keep it afloat. He too was inseparable from his cell phone as he pleaded with his impatient suppliers, his loan manager, his landlord, as he tried doggedly to stave off bankruptcy, all the while chain smoking, consuming a steady diet of antacid pills. Even the prematurely graying pharmacist assistant, whose Syrian wife kept pressing him to move heaven and earth to rescue her brother and his family from the anarchy of her war-torn homeland and whisk them into Canada. What more can I do? He would appeal to his cell phone in desperation as he ground his crumbling molars together. I filled out all the forms. I've called Immigration Canada. I've pestered our MP. I'm doing my best. But it was never good enough for his disappointed wife. Ah, cell phones, the ubiquitous bell shackling the human cat. He had never owned a cell phone, never would. These were the ultimate chains, he reasoned. With these diabolical devices, employers, spouses, parents, children, and various and sundry other unsavory parties could monitor you wherever you went. Ensure you enjoyed no peace, were always at their beck and call. They can send text messages just to rein you in, to remind you that you're never beyond their reach, that you cannot escape their electronic noose, and no conversation is private with those infernal machines. The most intimate declaration of love, the most intrusive medical consultation, all now occur on a city bus, a crowded restaurant, or on the street in front of his office for all to partake in. But it was worse than that, he decided. People walked around all day with their eyes glued to a tyrannical screen the size of a playing card, checking their stocks, their electronic mail, even the weather, for God's sake. All this to avoid paying attention to the beauty all around them, the sun, the clouds, the harbor, the storefronts of Spring Garden, the people passing by, some kind-hearted, some sad, some self-absorbed, all unique. To avoid thinking about justice, love, truth, all the delicious and manifold mysteries of life. And they were forever in a hurry, rushing to work, rushing home, even rushing to the theater or the restaurant for entertainment. How entertaining could it possibly be if they had to manage the stress of traffic, parking, arriving late? They all wear watches, glance at them constantly in exasperation or in fear. The point of watches had been to help them control time. But there was no doubt who the diabolical master really was. None of that was for him. He had shattered his chains long ago. He was free. And for that, they pitied him. They pitied him, as if freedom were a curse, an affliction. They called him homeless, but he had a home. The city, all of it. It belonged to him more than to anyone else. He slept in its streets, wandered its parks endlessly, woke up with its sunrise, vanished in its fogs, was cleansed by its rains. While they confined themselves to the small, constraining boxes they called homes, fretted about repairing them, financing them, he strutted through the public gardens, the Citadel, the waterfront, the university, Point Pleasant Park, the city's blood coursing through his veins. Halifax was part of him, and he was indistinguishable from the city. The less charitable, well, they called him a bum. That he could accept, since he didn't perform any of the activities that they would identify as useful, and he did inhabit the streets. Mostly, though, people called him Crazy Eddie, although he knew that moniker to be doubly inaccurate. Crazy because he lived outside and didn't care, because he dispensed his views on life and philosophy freely to anyone who would listen, because he was content living a life they simply couldn't fathom, enthralled by its beauty. Eddie, because that's what he told them his name was, if they ever asked. Who he was and how he arrived to occupy that particular corner of the universe was a long-standing local mystery, the subject of idle speculation and fanciful lore over a pint at the neighborhood watering holes. Initially, they hadn't cared at all, hadn't even noticed him. He'd just been another invisible homeless man who drifted through with the wind. Most still ignored him, crossed to the other side of the street to ignore him, to pretend he didn't exist, so that their humdrum middle-class existences could continue untarnished by guilt. But due to his longevity, his obvious intelligence, his desperate though reluctant sociability, his flagrant assurance of his own superiority over them, many of the locals took notice, viewed him as a curiosity, almost a municipal landmark. No one could remember exactly when he had graced the city with his idiosyncratic presence. After nearly 2 decades, it seemed there was something primordial about him, that like the trees, the hills, the harbor, he had always been there, that the city itself had been erected around Eddie and his 2 squares of sidewalk. Over a pint of beer in a dimly lit pub on the waterfront, however, an old-timer with a head shaped like a coconut, a grizzly beard, and a moth-eaten royal blue sweater offered his wisdom on the matter to his younger companions. I heard that he was a young Navy man out of the base right here in town, he began, patting down the wispy gray coils of hair that framed his largely bald head. He was what do you call it? An ensign. Yeah, an ensign or something. Well, he was engaged to his high school sweetheart, he was. Sweetheart he was, absolutely gaga over her. Loved her to pieces, but you see, he was sent on maneuvers in Europe or somewhere, or maybe the Skagerrak, I don't know, for a long deployment. Where our boy, he wrote this girl every single day and mailed letters whenever he was on shore leave and was itching to return so that they could go and marry. Finally, after a few months, he sailed back home and showed up at her place to surprise her. He didn't call her nothing, you understand. Just marched right in, as pretty as the newborn snow, all gussied up in his navy duds to lay claim to what was his. And of course, he didn't find her alone, but you already guessed that, didn't you? But it was who she was with that was the kicker. He paused for effect. It was his own father. Yes, it was. Can you imagine our boys back home? Can you imagine our boy's shock? After that, he simply lost it. Couldn't go back to her, couldn't go back home. He just plain lost it. You know what I mean? Took up his residence on Spring Garden that very afternoon. Well, his comrades were impressed, but the bartender who'd been eavesdropping on the old man's story from behind the large mahogany bar with brass rails chimed in. Hank, we've been over this too many times before. He's too smart for the Navy. Book smart, I mean, wicked smart. Shut up, man, the old-timer reported, raising his voice, his speech slurred by alcohol. Navy guys can be smart too. Yeah, but not like him. Philosophy and all, the bartender, a man in his late 40s with a round head, graying hair, and his own large bald patch, rejoined, an empty porter glass in his hand ready to be filled at the tap. He's a university boy, or I'm the premier of Nova Scotia. From somewhere out west, no doubt, probably a lawyer or something. Who knows what brought him here? One of the servers piped up from a table nearby, where she too had been following the conversation. I don't know, she said. I heard he's an American from the South, a member of the Klan. They said he killed a man and escaped across the border, but can't use no money or credit cards because they catch him. So he lives on the street here. But every morning at dawn, he puts his white hood over his head in the park and does some Klan rituals. That's a bunch of hogwash, Charlene, Hank exclaimed. No, really, my sister saw it with her own eyes, Charlene insisted. I mean, she went for a run along the northwest arm before work and saw him covered in this white shawl, muttering some kind of chant. She was horrified to think that there's some evil Klansman right here in Halifax. Those are just a bunch of tall tales, the bartender chided. You can believe them if you want, but they're just people talking. I even heard someone say he escaped from the loony bin in Burnside. They'd have gotten him back by now, wouldn't they? It's not like he's hiding very well. Does it really matter? One of Hank's younger friends, a chubby man in his 30s with oversized jowls, asked. He's just some hobo. You know, I asked him once myself, the bartender confided, ignoring the younger man's question. Eddie, I says, where are you from? Why do you stay here? He just stared through me with the strangest expression you'd ever seen and sputtered out some claptrap about Rousseau and the Danube River. The revelers laughed uproariously. He's clearly out of his gourd, one declared as she swirled her lager around her glass and took a large draught. But the man they called Crazy Eddie cared little what others said about him and paid it no heed. He had rejected their mediocrity, their pettiness, their ignorance years ago. He couldn't expect them to understand his choices, what motivated him. As long as he had the glorious maritime sky, the salt air, the sublime trees, and, of course, the harbor, he could dispense with them easily. His was a very cerebral existence. Having renounced most of the social interaction attendant in human affairs, the empty small talk, the petty competition, he devoted his hours to cogitation, contemplation, reminiscences. At his trial, Socrates argued that the unexamined life is not worth living. Well, unlike most people, Crazy Eddie led an examined life. So under the circumstances, it wouldn't be surprising to learn that the man they called Crazy Eddie had contempt for everyone he encountered, everyone under the sun. But there is, of course, an exception to every rule. An older woman that he knew only as Jane was the sole person Crazy Eddie respected, genuinely valued. In her early 60s, Jane had retired early when her older husband did, moving downtown to enjoy their golden years to the fullest. Quick-witted, well-read, contemplative, the man they called Eddie saw in her an intellectual equal, something he rarely encountered on the street. Jane had taken an instant interest in him the first time she had heard him lecturing to a family of tourists several years ago. She would stop by, often with food or a cup of coffee, just to talk to him as a human being, a companion, not to humor him or mock him like others. She seemed genuinely concerned about his well-being. As she visited his office to chat almost daily while she ran errands in town. Acerbic Eddie actually looked forward to these social calls, had begun to view her as a companion, even a sort of friend, something that he had not possessed in over 20 years. "Good afternoon, Eddie," she said as the sun neared the end of its lazy journey to the west that day. "You must be enjoying this absolutely perfect day." "Yes," he assented. "I'll take him as long as I can get him. How are you today, Jane?" "I baked some cookies this morning. Would you like some?" she asked as she proffered a brown paper lunch bag smeared with translucent grease stains to him. Witnessing his discomfort, she added, "Vegetarian, of course. I wouldn't offer them to you if they weren't." "Thank you," he grunted as he grabbed the bag. "Say, Jane, what do you think about the uproar over that Cornwallis statue?" Jane was the only person that Eddie would actually ask questions of, whose opinions actually mattered to him. I don't know. I understand what they're objecting to," she reflected. "In many ways, he was an unsavory character, but he was the city's founder. To pull down the statue, it seems wrong somehow, like it would erase history. Why? What do you think?" "I'm not fully sure," he confessed. "I see your point, but I also wonder whether the Micmac are objecting precisely because it erases their history. It's not a simple issue, but it strikes me that it's appropriate for the city to be having this conversation, regardless of what they decide. Human beings usually don't care what evils they do to others. To discuss it, to agonize over it, well, that might just be progress. I suppose, but I fear the consequences if we could just purge people from history. It's very Orwellian. But listen, I wanted to talk to you about something else. I don't want to intrude, but I'm a little worried about you. The winter's coming, and they say it's going to be a bad one. Is there anything I can do to help you out, Eddie?" Jane inquired, perhaps sensing the turmoil that had been growing within his troubled breast of late. Her sincerity, her genuine compassion moved him. Instead of answering, he gazed forlornly past him, as if half remembering a deeply buried secret of bygone times, when the dinosaurs roamed a pristine and unblemished earth, and disclosed, lowering his voice almost to a whisper, like he was divulging a secret too personal, too precious to share with the winds. "My name is Gabriel." That's a good part of the first chapter, setting up this journey backwards and forwards to see how he navigates, how he got there and how he navigates life on the street. So let me turn this over to you at this point. Do you have any questions about anything you've heard? Billy.
What does the M stand for in your middle name?
Mark.
Mark. So you wouldn't be confused with the other Norrin Ripsman?
So you wouldn't be confused with, exactly, Norrin A. Ripsman or Norrin R. Ripsman, exactly. Yeah, very important.
But can I ask you a really question?
Sure.
You're a busy person like yourself. How do you find the time to write this stuff? Like, I don't have time to eat breakfast.
I am very efficient with my time and very demanding of myself. Maybe in some respects too demanding, but I don't watch much TV. I don't waste much time, and so I work on my day job. I don't actually write during the day. I try not to write, that is during the Monday to Friday day, because that's my day job. And I try and do my other writing there. I do other research and writing in my teaching, and I was department chair for 6 years, just ending in July. And so, the daytime I try not to use there except on Sundays. But I use my nighttime and I'll work late. I also tend not to sleep as much as I should. And I tend to have discussions with my characters and have them tell me off in the middle of the night. So I tend to work in the middle of the night too. But I just try to make my time count. I've always done that. I've always tried to make sure that I've published 9 academic books. I try to make my time count and do what I need to do with my time. So a lot of people
like today I'm gonna write X amount.
No. No, I don't say I'm gonna write X amount. What I do is I tell myself, I've always told myself this with my academic writing. I have a main project, whatever that is, and this was my main project more so than anything else over while I was working on this. And I commit to myself that 5 days a week. 5 days a week, I have to do at least 15 minutes of writing on my main project. If I do 4 hours, that's all the better. But I can't let, more than 2 days a week go by where I don't do at least 15 minutes of writing. Now, on all other days, even when I'm walking to synagogue, I'm thinking, my brain is having conversations with characters. It's just the way things go. So I'm writing even when I'm not writing. And so a lot of the times I'll drive home from Bethlehem from work, and I'll have spent an hour and 15 minutes thinking through how what I'm doing with the scene isn't working, or how I should be doing that. And then I'll just go right up to my office on the 3rd floor and start writing it up and make sure that I don't lose it after the drive home. Or sometimes, after sleeping, or not sleeping, I'll have to get up, and the first thing I need to do is get it out onto the computer so that I don't, or get it out in writing so that I don't lose it. But I try to be very efficient with my time. It's always what I've done, and I don't think I would, be able to do anything if I didn't use my time well.
Over what period of time did you write this book?
So from July of 2021 until December, I was working on this. Now, 2 stories came later, the 2 Lower Merion stories. I'll talk about this later. The 2 Lower Merion stories came later, but I had what I thought was a 12-story short story collection as of December. And then it took me about 9 months to do this. Now, I edited it many times afterwards, but in terms of a draft that I was happy with, as before editing it, took about 9 months to write this, although I had planned this out sometime in October of 2021. I had about 4 pages, single spaced, of notes where I had planned that after a number of walks and meant to get to that. I had thought about how certain scenes would occur, how certain chapters would occur. And so I was thinking about it even before I started writing it in that December of 2021. And of course, made changes and edited it until it was actually in print.
So I have 2 different questions.
Sure.
So one, the character is obviously more extreme, but not wholly unrecognizable to a certain type of person, usually male, who inhabits academia and or yeshiva, because those are not so different, right? There's this characters that they don't quite fit. They find them some role that is kind of like ill-defined. They're like both vastly over and underqualified for kind of where they wind up, and they have aspects of these characters, the streets, but they'll give them some like small room and small office and stuff like. So one question is sort of how much is that, is there like, is your time in academia kind of like, did you see some elements of this character in there? Because as I was listening, I'm like, okay, I know that guy, and I know that guy, and that guy in yeshiva. And like, again, this is more extreme, but like, that they're both too smart and too dumb, so to speak, for the world, and sort of like are brilliant but can't quite get the executive functioning right. So that's kind of one. Well, I'll leave the other one for later. But
so that's an interesting question. Not consciously, but maybe now that you mention it, now I'm thinking about that. I don't choose to write about anybody that I know. I think that's a dangerous path. But and I had this idea for this character who, I came to him actually with his flaws. It's his flaws that attracted me to him. Once I figured, once I had this idea of a homeless man, I was starting to think of, well, what character gets him there and how does he get there? And I came to him and kind of fell in love with him because of the flaws that he had. So I wasn't thinking academy and I wasn't thinking yeshiva. But it is true that I've met a number of people in academic life who are extremely smart, but also don't know how to navigate, just don't know how to navigate normal life and don't know how to navigate people who aren't as smart as they are. And so maybe I was shaped in that regard without even thinking about it. So that's an interesting question.
So you're from Canada. Your book is based in Canada. How many years have you been in the States?
So I get thrown out of a lot of places. And I've lived around the world. Part of being an academic, especially one who studies international relations, is that I travel an awful lot, and I've been blessed to live in a lot of different places. So I'll say that this story and most of the short stories in Songbook, except for the Lower Merion ones, are Canadian stories. I actually have this third novel that I've just recently finished, which is a Lower Merion novel, which actually explores the contemporary political divide through the lens of a Lower Merion Jewish family. And that one,
My question was going to be, what made you go home with the story?
because geography is important to me, and I need to understand the geography. So I've lived in Halifax. This is set in Halifax and Toronto primarily, not exclusively. And I've lived in both locations and felt that I understood the geography, the mood, the local personalities, and that was important. I understood the geography, how it fit. I envisioned this homeless person in a setting that was very unlike him, that was very surprising for him to be in, and that's kind of turned into Halifax. I understood that was, given his character, his background, it was one of the most unlikely places that I could imagine him, in fact. And so I had understood that because I'd lived there for a year. I taught at Lehigh University for a year prior to getting my first position. And I just understood exactly how he would intersect with that environment and the population. I actually went back and did some supplemental research just to make sure that I understood where he slept, where he worked, exactly the kinds of walks that he would have, what he would have connected to in the city. And so, I did a lot of additional research for that, but I felt that I needed to set it where I understood how the geography would shape him as well.
So that decision came first?
That decision came early on. There was this understanding of this problem of this really bright homeless man who didn't fit in. But then I understood that it had to be there. And that was one of the first decisions it wasn't really a decision, it was just, it had to be, it's obvious. And then I understood where he came from in Toronto, which is actually not far from where I came from in Toronto. And so he grows up not far from the neighborhood that I grew up in, and he went to the University of Toronto like I did. So I had to understand the geography of his life, and I had to understand how he interacted with that. The short stories also, I'll talk about them later, but I had to understand them, and at the time, nothing came to me that was obviously, say, a Lower Merion story until towards the end. I had these ideas that actually fit here and were perfect here and wouldn't fit anywhere else and made sense in this environment. And in the other novels that I've written since, I have 2 more novels that I've completed since then. One of them needs more work. Another one I'm actually trying to market right now. The Lower Merion one I'm trying to market right now. But in those novels, I actually benefit from some of the overseas tours of duty that I've had. I've lived in London, I've lived in Paris, I've lived in Tel Aviv, I've lived in Melbourne, Australia, and I've traveled very widely as well for my research. So some of those experiences find their way into different settings of the novel as well, of the novels that I have as well. And for me, if I don't write about a venue that I know, it's not credible. And I think credibility is really important. You have to understand the geographic space and how the character is going to interact with them. For me, otherwise, the story is just not going to be credible. Thank you.
One of my children, I don't want to say who, has a question.
Please.
How did you come up with the idea for the story?
So the story came up with me. The story approached me, and what happened was actually I was walking to shul. I was walking to Lower Merion Synagogue one day, and it was as I was walking. I mean, for a year I had shall I say the dubious pleasure of having to say Kaddish for my father. Who heard the first of I read him the first of my short stories after I started this. I don't think he got much out of it, didn't get the rest, but at least he heard and understood that I was taking his advice. And I walked back and forth to show, and I just let my mind wander. And so I find opening my mind to ideas just allowed me to come up with stories, and this story came to me. I had a lot of stories that came to me that I just never pursued because I didn't really feel connected to, or I didn't feel it was a story that I could tell or tell appropriately or well. This is a story that just came to me, and I thought, that's interesting. That's interesting. Let me see what I can do with it. Let me see the why of this puzzle. But thank you for the question. I appreciate that.
If you're talking about authenticity, do you ever, as a part of you, identify with the oracle? Are you the oracle?
I am not the oracle. I identify with my characters. It's funny. I heard, I don't know if you know Edgar Karat, an Israeli writer, but I heard him. I was in a group that met with him, and he answered one of my questions about his characters by telling me that he has very complicated relationships with his characters, because often now I don't do this, but he writes to right a wrong, or he writes to take revenge against somebody that was mean to him or his family. And he says he's got a problem because he can't hate his characters, and he can't have negative attitudes towards his characters for two reasons. One, because they live inside his head, and he talks to them and they talk to him. And as a result of that, he finds it very hard to hate his characters, and he understands them. And that's the other thing. When you're writing someone, you try and make them believable, because if they're not authentic, if they don't come across as authentic, then they're not believable. And so he says that he can't hate his characters, and he understands them all, and they're all, in a way, then they all become part of him. And I suspect, conversely, that there is some of me in all my characters, even the ones that I disagree with, and even the ones that I don't really share a worldview with, even ones that behave in ways that are surprising to me. Nonetheless, I do believe there's a little bit of me in them, except none of them are me. And I haven't lived their lives. I wouldn't make their choices. In almost all cases, I would never make their choices. They think things that would never occur to me except through their mind, in a sense, that just, unless I were letting my imagination go. And so I think there's probably a lot of me in there, but there's a lot that's not me. And I think it would be hard for someone who doesn't know me, different for Natalie, but it'd be hard for someone who doesn't know me to be able to see, well, what's me and what's not, and be able to say, and they all get into situations. If I wrote about my life, aside from the travel stuff, if I wrote about my life, my readers would be very bored. But I sit in front of a computer and I type and I think, and I go to archives and read, and it's a boring life in that regard. But so I don't write about my life and what these characters do and interact with, and their youths are a lot more dramatic and sometimes glamorous than my own, except living on the streets. But so it's not my life and it's not me, but there are elements of me that are there, I suppose, definitely.
So that's the other question, which is sort of what you've just alluded to, but let's go to the bar scene, because it's concrete, right? So, I mean, do you spend a lot of time in bars? In the sense of, in other words, where is this? And it doesn't matter, because like you said, they all have more glamorous lives than you. So is that coming from like other reading? Is that coming from, you say you don't watch TV and movies, but that's like another, like, where is the texture of these experiences that you presumably don't have come from?
So I do research. And so, for example, I've got a story here that came to me, which is a story about a chat room. It's about, it's about modern technology. It's about, disengagement, disconnection, and a strange kind of connection over modern technology. And I heard my nephews talk about chat rooms in games and the like. And I realized that that's exactly where I wanted to set this story. But I also realized that I know nothing about that. I'm sure, you know that I am not the kind of guy who spends my time on devices. And I decided I've got to get into this. And I dove right in, and I spent about a month obsessively, not because I'm an obsessive game player, but obsessively, I spent about a month trying to make sure I understood this dynamic. And I thought that I got a fair idea. Of course, since then I've just erased it from my iPad, and I've never gone back there again. It served its purpose. But I also sat in bars, and I sat in a bar in Halifax, listening, getting a sense of not these characters. I didn't hear these characters. These characters are in my head, but I wanted to understand how they talked. Yeah, that's important to me. I want to understand how they talked. I want to understand, the kind of camaraderie and one-upmanship that they might engage in the tall tales. And so, yeah, I sat, bought a beer and sat down and just, tried to listen into what's going on. I have stories, I have another story in here, more of a racy story in there, where I was sitting in a Second Cup in Toronto, which is the same sort of a Starbucks, a Canadian Starbucks, and I heard a conversation that was just like stunning. It was a remarkable conversation, and I thought, that's interesting. I actually put myself into that story as someone sitting, a guy sitting with a coffee who's obviously intrigued. And I built a story around that. I had a story around that. So yeah, I try to do different kinds of research, from geographic research, from
It's bedtime, sorry.
no problem. Have a good night. Thank you for coming.
Since you talk about the racing.
You know what? Why don't you write your names before you leave?
Oh yeah, put your name down there because there's a drawing at the end for songbook. So yeah, you can put 4 of those in.
Yes.
So the thing is that I do a kind of research, different types, but I try to get a sense of, well, what does it sound like? What's the music of language? What's the music of the interaction? And that helps me understand how to write the scene, and how the characters may interact. Now, of course, the other thing I've heard writers say before, which I always thought was pretentious and a little obnoxious, and I apologize if I'm going to sound pretentious and a little obnoxious, because I actually found that they're right. But I've had writers, I've always been interested in fiction, and I always go to talks of writers to hear how they write and what the process is. And I've had writers, and I'm currently on a group of a fiction writers group that meets every 2 weeks and talks about their experiences, and they say the same types of things, that your characters talk to you, and your characters will help write the book as well. And so sometimes, usually late at night, usually when I should be sleeping, because I have to drive to Bethlehem the next day, and I have lectures that I need to give and I need to be coherent for. And it's usually then at about 4 a.m. that my characters will come to me and tell me that, I'm not being fair to them, that I'm not representing them fairly. They would never do what I've just written that they would do. And usually it's a question of, so, well, then what would you do? And they give me their advice. And it's kind of my subconscious brain playing out and figuring this out. So part of it is research and getting a sense for the feel, so that I can ground my imagination. And part of it is them telling me that I'm just so far off base and that it's not credible. And I'm always grateful for their interventions. I almost always listen to them. And I usually feel that it improves. So perhaps I'm pretentious or crazy. I think maybe a little bit of
I
both.
think you need to be a little both to be a writer.
I think maybe a little bit of both, but yes, definitely. So let me take, let me move into Songbook, which I've talked a little bit about, and I'll do a reading from Songbook as well. But let me tell you about Songbook and my travails as I went through my first literary fiction work, the short story collection of 14 short stories. There's 14 short stories, as I say, 2 of them set in Lower Merion, 1 of them set in cyberspace, and then the rest of them set in Canada. And the theme of this, the reason why I call it my songbook, is that most of these stories are loosely inspired by the lyrics of classic rock music, or after the fact I came to associate them with particular songs and lyrics. And that united this collection as I was going forward. I've always loved classic rock, and I've loved the poetry of classic rock. It's not simply the music, but what I love about the art form is that it marries some of the groups that I like are more lyrical. I don't really like groups that are just musically talented but don't have anything to say. I do like the lyricism of it all. And so I've always thought in terms of the poetry of classic rock. I'll often quote classic rock songs that are apt or that are apropos. And so as I went on and had more and more stories, I realized that what I could do was tie this together with epigraphs. I could tie this together with many of the lyrics that I quote or the characters quote in the stories themselves. And I had 14 stories which quoted about 35 or 36 separate songs throughout the work, including 14 epigraphs. And that's when I found out, as I was just getting to apply for copyright, that's when I found out that fair use, the legal doctrine of fair use, does not apply to poetry or song lyrics, which was quite a big disappointment because I thought it did apply. Not being a lawyer myself, but being an armchair Google lawyer, I thought, hey, it applies. And turns out that being an armchair Google lawyer is not necessarily the best way to go. So I found out that meant that I had to request permission. And in order to request permission, the owners actually the original owners no longer own it. It's now, most of it is owned by Hal Leonard Incorporated in the United States. But I had to apply for not only, since this was being published not only in the United States, I had to apply for the worldwide right to publish it, as in addition to the American right to publish this. And that meant that it only would have cost me about $38,000 to publish this work, including all of those reproduced song lyrics. Now, this is largely a money-losing endeavor, not a money-making endeavor. It's a labor of love, but it's not a labor of love that my wife would allow me to spend $38,000 on, half a year of my daughter's college tuition. No, that wasn't going to happen. And so when I realized that, it occurred to me that my songbook was dead initially, and I was really demoralized. I was very upset about it, until it occurred to me that I had a way out. And so I have a maybe slightly cheeky foreword here, where I explain exactly why this is songbook and why there are no songs in songbook. Instead of the epigraphs, I have an appendix listing what the epigraph songs were rather than the lyrics themselves. And where I quoted songs directly, and the songs often advanced the action and advanced the character development in the stories. And where that was the case, I made up my own classic rock bands and songs and supplied the lyrics. I had my two, they actually, they made it to the Oracle as well, because I use song lyrics to just about everything that I write. So I have my two groups, the chocolate bullfrogs and the melancholy grapes, which I thought kind of fit like as a 1970s rock brand in both cases, different moods. And so I supplied my own lyrics to replace the lyrics that I had initially had in there. And yes, it was disappointing, but then I had people read it and they felt, it holds together and it kind of works. It's not necessarily what the first version of it looked like, but it kind of works. It gets the idea across. And so that's my songbook. And I have a range of stories that just came to me, very, very different stories at different moods, different ages of characters, different life experiences. And so I have some of them are have that technological story, the chat room. I have a satire story for my father of a mishap that occurs in a delivery room. I have a story about a chance meeting, young love, and a chance meeting at a bus depot, intercity bus depot. I have what else do I have in there? I've got a story about a mysterious satchel that someone leaves on the back seat of an airport limousine. that people tend to like. So 14 different stories there. I thought I would read you one of the stories so you get a flavor of what this is.
May I just ask a super
Please.
quick question? To write song lyrics, so you're putting on a different hats. You're putting, it's like you're putting on your writer hat to put yourself in a songwriter's shoes so you can be a songwriter, right? That's messy. Was that messy? Was it, or just being a writer covered it? Like,
You know, I've written poetry, not much, but I've written poetry, and there's poetry in the Oracle Spring Garden Road as well. And song lyrics were a different kind of poetry. I had to think of the meter, I had to think of the
Right.
tune that I might be singing that to. And it was different. At first I thought that I wouldn't do it and may not be credible. And then after a few attempts, I tried that and, tried that on my wife, and she thought that may work. And then I tinkered with it a little bit more, and it seemed to go okay. I wouldn't quit my day job to write song lyrics, and I certainly wouldn't quit my day job to become a musician. I call myself the world's worst saxophonist. I taught myself how to play saxophone, when I turned 50, and I thought that no one should ever hear me actually outside the house, because I think once again abomination against God and man. And so I actually have, this is my saxophone here and our music stand that were idealized and stylized in the front cover. I hired a cover person to draw something or paint something and produce something based on that in our backyard. But no, I'm not going to become a lyricist, and I'm not going to become a rock musician. I think that ship's probably sailed for me. But it was an interesting challenge. I actually kind of enjoyed it after I gave up the frustration and decided that I needed to get over the frustration.
that's a fun thought.
So are you thinking in music or in lyrics or both? Like, do you know the song? Do you know what it sounds like?
I did have to come up with a tune in order to fit it in, and it had to be something different from what was out there. So I did come up with something. I don't remember what that was at this point. And so at this point, it's gone. It's not like I wrote down notes for that. It was just, and so, no, I don't remember it anymore, but it did fit the tune. It had to fit the tune or else it wouldn't have worked, I felt. But that tune is lost. Those tunes, they're all lost to me at this point. So
If you can remember, maybe you could sell it all for $38,000.
I could sell the rights to those lyrics for $38,000. No one would buy them, but I could sell the rights to that. So I'm going to read you a story called Memory, which is a shorter story. One of the reasons why I think it's a good one to read. But second of all, because there are a number of themes that I think are interesting, and rather than just like I could read you the satchel story, but I think that's less interesting from a character and dynamic point of view. So let me read you Memory. What's wrong? You can't seem to settle down, my wife asked, a little annoyed that I wasn't allowing her to sleep either. Sorry, it's just that I remembered something. About Mom and Dad, I replied. She propped herself up on her pillow and turned to face me in the dark, her body silhouetted by the ambient light that escaped through the folds in the curtains. What is it? She asked, with the concern, the solicitude, the guilt of the spouse with two living parents. It's just something that happened when I was young that I'd forgotten about. It's hard for me to explain. What happened? I don't really know. That's what's bugging me, I recounted. One year, when I was about 10 or 12 years old, we spent a summer vacation in Lake Placid. At one point on that trip, I remember sitting in the car with my sisters at a strip mall, listening to the radio. We were waiting for my parents while they went into an office of some sort, next to a Price Chopper supermarket. When they came out, they were both crying. Why? Despite the late hour, the early morning meeting with her producer scheduled for 8 a.m., my wife's curiosity was piqued. That's just it. I have no idea. It's one of those childhood memories that gets forgotten, gets buried under decades of life. Maybe I repressed it, but for whatever reason, it came to me quite vividly now. She considered. Maybe Ingrid will know. Why don't you ask her when we see her on Friday? Good idea, Mandy, I concurred, as I started to knead her back with my palms to help her to succumb to sleep. That Friday night, my wife, my 3 boys, and I ascended the steps to Ingrid's Outremont townhouse, as we've done for most of the past decade. Ingrid is my sister, the middle child, 2 years older than I, 4 years junior to Emma. Intelligent, good-natured, fun-loving, she was always a delight to be around. When I was born, she made it her mission to look out for me, to be my guardian angel. We were inseparable as children and have remained so as adults with families of our own. We live a short drive from each other. She in Outremont, me in an upper duplex in the plateau. And we bring our families together for dinner every Friday night in her dining room. She would never allow my wife and me to host. It was her prerogative as big sister. At times I find that hard to swallow, even downright insulting. We're both in our 40s with only 22 months between us. I own my own small business. I'm an independent person in my own right. Why should the tyranny of birth order keep me perpetually the supplicant? Yep, that's just her way, and it's hard to hold a grudge against Ingrid. Over time, I grew to accept it. Even after her divorce and her leukemia diagnosis, she continued to preside over dinner as affably as ever, happy to remain in command, to enjoy her pride of place. On this particular Friday, Ingrid was weaker than normal, still feeling the effects of the immunotherapy treatment she had received earlier in the week. As a concession, she had allowed Mandy and me to prepare the food. Her spirits were as high as ever, though, and she clearly delighted in having her baby brother in her home. After dinner, the children descended to the basement to play ping pong and billiards, while the adults retired into the living room with digestif. I installed myself on a brown leather armchair, sipping a glass of Sortilège maple whiskey liqueur, and waited for my sister to finish her savage critique of the unprincipled principal at her son's school to question her about her parents. So there he goes again. He makes a rule, but it doesn't apply to his own daughter. When I catch him with his hands in the cookie jar, she mimed a ridiculous parody of the principal's shocked face to play to her audience. He responds with more evasions, half-truths, and lies. Now that's integrity, Ingrid concluded. Wow, what a pig, Mandy chipped in sympathetically, shaking her telegenic head from side to side to dislodge an errant blonde lock from her eyes. No, I wouldn't go that far. Ingrid paused for comedic effect, then continued. Okay, I would. He is a pig. Oink! Her deep, sonorous laugh was infectious, even if her voice was hoarser, rawer than usual. I waited for the laughter to die down before jumping in. Ing, do you remember when we were kids, we spent a couple of weeks in Lake Placid one summer? Of course. We actually went there a couple of times, but you might have been too young to remember the first time, Squirt. Her response was encouraging. I was confident she would help me get to the bottom of this. Well, I was thinking of a time when I was about 10 or so. Mom and Dad went into some sort of office next to a supermarket in a strip mall and came out crying. I let my voice trail off, waiting for Ingrid to indicate her recognition and supply details. Are you sure I was there? I don't remember that, she pronounced after a brief pause, ruffling her short, boyish hair with her lavender-painted nails. Yes, the 3 of us waited in the car, eating Carvel ice cream. The Rolling Stones' Sympathy for the Devil was playing over the radio, and you and Emma were singing "Hoo, hoo" into your fists, pretending they were microphones. I remember dropping my scoop off the cone and messing up Mom's station wagon. You burst out laughing while Emma told me that I was going to get into big trouble when Mom came back. Does it ring any bells? I queried. She wrinkled her brow while she plumbed the depths of her memory. With every passing second, I grew convinced that I would get no help from Ingrid after all. Suddenly, her face brightened, bringing to mind the luminous, feminine, irrepressible Ingrid of old. And she blurted out, "No, you're all mixed up. That didn't happen in Mom's car. That was in Dad's new Chrysler sedan. That's why Emma and I tried to clean it up frantically. He was so proud of that car and wasn't thrilled about us eating in it in the first place. Also, I'm pretty sure it was Baskin and Robbins ice cream because I had their Jamocha almond fudge, which Carvel doesn't sell. And I don't remember Mom and Dad crying." Her recollection surprised me. I was pretty sure I had dirtied my mother's station wagon. In my mind's eye, I can still see myself sprawled out in the cargo hold, which we kids had christened the backpack. I was leaning over towards the back seat where my sisters were sitting. Gravity did the rest, making a gooey mess on the upholstery behind the driver's seat. Also, Ingrid continued her critique, that wasn't in Lake Placid, that was when we stayed in Alexandria Bay. I'm positive it was Lake Placid. We started out at the Marcy Hotel. Do you remember the Marcy? I turned to Mandy to explain. Mom said it was a fancy hotel that she used to stay at when she was a kid. But by then it was really run down, so we moved out into an efficiency just outside of town. I pivoted back to Ingrid. But I was really wondering why they were crying. Sorry, Squirt, Ingrid cut in. The Marcy was in Alexandria Bay. It was a horrible place. We couldn't sleep all night because there was a mouse squeaking underneath the bed all night. Sounds like quite the place, Mandy chipped in. It was awful, I agreed. That'd be a fun topic for a local interest spot, don't you think? Luxury hotels that have gone to pot? But I don't remember a mouse. There was a giant spider on the wall that freaked us all out, and it was a cricket that kept us up all night, not a mouse. I shared a bed with Dad while Ingrid and Emma huddled together with Mom. I don't think any of us slept that night. It was definitely in Lake Placid, though. No, it wasn't, Ingrid persisted with lively defiance in her warm bronze eyes. Squirt, you wouldn't remember your own name if it weren't printed on your driver's license. My eldest niece, a spitting image of her father, who had been listening at the door, found our bickering amusing. Are you sure you two grew up in the same family? You can't agree on anything, she chortled. You had a point. How could we remember these events so differently? You know, now that I think about it, I believe I do remember them going into a real estate office when we were in Alexandria Bay, Ingrid piped in. I think they used to own a property in New York State when they were young. Maybe it had something to do with that when we were young. Maybe it had something to do with that. But why were they crying when they came out? I persisted. You know, I don't believe they were, replied Ingrid thoughtfully. Now that you mention it, I think that they were laughing when they returned to the car. And I don't even think the ice cream you speared on Dad's upholstery spoiled the mood. Laughing? I asked incredulously. That's not at all what I remember. Why would they have been laughing? Oh, come on, Dad's sense of humor? It always came out in spades on vacation. And now that we have our own kids, I'm convinced that Mom and Dad like to steal away from us at times to have their own private moments, to share their own private jokes. Though drawn and pallid, Ingrid's face when she said this was a picture of tranquility, almost rapture. Dad certainly did have an odd sense of humor, I recalled with a laugh. You remember his awful trapezoid joke? Ingrid groaned. He never tired of it. It was so bad, yet he kept telling it to people. Tell it to me, my niece begged. Well, okay, I consented. What did the general say when he fell into a misshapen rectangle that his enemy placed in his path to ensnare him? I give up, my niece said. Ingrid supplied the punchline with mock drama. Oh no, it's a trapezoid! My niece guffawed, then went downstairs to share it with the other children. You know, I heard that Cheap Trick song about the other day, Ingrid volunteered, about Mummy and Daddy being weird. It made me smile because it was like it was written for them. I miss them, I said reflectively. Well, Ingrid sighed wistfully, I may see them soon. Don't talk like that, Ing, Mandy commanded. The treatment's going well, you're gonna be fine. Hope you're right, she said without conviction, grasping the rolled arm of the Chesterfield she was installed on for support. The conversation shifted to provincial politics, as it often did, but we soon noticed that Ingrid was too fatigued to keep the party going. So Mandy and I helped her clean up from dinner before returning home. As usual, we'd had a wonderful evening, but felt the storm clouds gathering ominously in the distance. As I lay down to sleep that night, I remained troubled about the episode in the parking lot all those years ago. I found Ingrid's version of the event unsatisfying. So many details of her account were at odds with my own recollection. Surely I couldn't have been that far off the mark, could I? On Sunday morning, I decided to call Emma to see if she could shed any light on the mystery. Emma had moved to England after she graduated McGill and had little contact with the family thereafter. I had hoped that our mother's extended illness, our parents' passing, might bring us close together again. But the truth was that we were very different people, had incompatible outlooks on life. The 5-hour time difference meant that it was early afternoon in London. I waited on the line listening to the international ringtone, 2 short bursts alternating with a short silence, until I heard her voice, her accent altered by many years overseas, on the line. Hi, Emma, I began cheerfully. How's life on your side of the pond? Oh, it's you, Thomas. She sounded disappointed. I'm rather busy, actually. I see. If you prefer, I could call you later in the week, I volunteered. She hesitated for a moment, thinking over my proposition, then decided, no, I suppose we can talk now. Why did she always make me feel like I was an imposition? It had been that way ever since she entered CEGEP, Quebec's 2-year bridge between high school and university. She was always too cool, too important to waste her time with her baby brother. It wasn't that way when we were kids. How's Quentin? I inquired politely. Fine. She had this annoying habit of repeating answers twice, distractedly, as if to underscore the effort she required to hold a conversation with me. And how's your wife? Amanda. She's well, thanks. The boys are well too. We had a great time with Ing and the kids on Friday. Too bad you weren't there, I responded jovially enough, ignoring the slight. There was an awkward silence. Was she reading her texts while talking to me? Listen, Emma, I jumped straight to the point. I was hoping you could help me out with something. Huh? What would you need my help with? You know I'm not going to be back in Canada for a while. She was already trying to wriggle out of any possible obligations. No, it's nothing like that, I assured her. It was so frustrating to talk to her sometimes. I'm just trying to remember something that happened when we were kids. I thought you might be able to shed some light on it. All right, she conceded. Shoot. I briefly explained my quest and the discrepancies between Ingrid's and my own accounts. Over the phone, it was impossible to see if my tale brought a flash of recognition to her eyes. What could that possibly matter? That was almost 40 years ago. I know, I admitted, but it's been bothering me. I really need to know. Does this ring a bell for you? Guess it would matter to you. You were always their favorite, she said with venom. Maybe Mom's, I conceded with annoyance. For reasons I could never understand, Dad always favored you. You never had a kind word for him. Always rode him for his accent, his smoking, for everything. Yet you were always his special girl. Poor Ingrid always tried so hard, yet she always played second fiddle to you. Oh, you and Ingrid always saw only what you wanted to. Our parents were the most selfish people I have ever met. We were just impositions to them. I could picture her nose wrinkling, her jaw clenching as she said this. Look, I didn't call to fight with you. If you don't know anything about it, let's just forget it. I had promised myself that I wouldn't let her draw me into an unpleasant confrontation, as she always did. Clearly, I had failed. Well, she hesitated, I think I do remember the vacation you're talking about. And? I asked testily. Well, I think you've both jumbled different vacations together. To begin with, while you're right, the Marcy was in Lake Placid. The summer I believe you are referring to was the year cousin William got married in Saratoga Springs, and we stayed in a cottage near Lake George. When we arrived, we had to pick up the keys from a real estate office nearby, which was in a plaza with a Safeway supermarket and a Baskin Robbins. While they were getting the keys, you and Ingrid went to get ice cream from Baskin and Robbins, while I got milk and other staples from the cottage from Safeway. Mystery solved. Well, not quite, I ruminated. I'm sure it was a Price Chopper rather than a Safeway. No, it was definitely a Safeway, she protested. I suppose that's not really important, but why were they crying when they returned to the car? They weren't. They were yelling at each other. She spoke as if she was scolding a small child, an ignorant child. But why would they have been yelling? I asked with skepticism. Because they always did. They fought all the time. Don't you remember? That's why I stopped going on vacation with you all once I was old enough to stay by myself. I couldn't take all their bickering. They were always at one another's throat. Oh, come on. Of course they argued, but no more than most people, probably a lot less. My boys would probably say that Mandy and I fought a lot as well, I reasoned. But that wasn't really true. Ours was a loving relationship, a playful one, just not in front of the boys. From the unguarded moments I caught, the glimpses, the tender glances when they thought I wasn't looking, and from the effect that Dad's death had on Mom, I knew the same was true of my parents. It had to be. I sometimes wonder whether you're willfully blind, Thomas. You see everything through romantic lenses, she chided. At any rate, Dad was in a foul mood because of the drive. Perhaps he was hungry too. and the two of them were at each other's throats. I'm sure it didn't help that they came back to find that you'd spilled ice cream all over the loaner car that they were driving. Loaner? Weren't we in Mom's car? I asked. No, I think Mom had an accident in her car and it was being repaired. We drove a loaner down to the States that year, Emma recalled. I guess I forgot that, but I remember the rushed up cleaning job that you and Ing did, using a Mad magazine and water because we didn't have any Kleenex or paper towels. The image made me smile. That's right. The more we rubbed and the more we embedded the ice cream into the fabric of the seat, and oh, did it smell! Emma's voice became more animated. When was the last time we all laughed together like that? I really miss it, I declared nostalgically, believing that I might actually have been reaching her for the first time in many years. Oh, grow up, will you, Thomas? She countered acidly. Couldn't fathom, still can't fathom the depths of resentment in her heart. I wanted to tell her to give up her bitterness, that now that they were dead, it was time to find a way to forgive them, forgive us all, for whatever it was that had poisoned her so. But I realized that it would be pointless, so I said nothing, leaving a dead silence on the line. Anyway, I've got to go, she announced peremptorily. It's been good to hear from you. Emma, I called out suddenly before she could hang up. It occurred to me that she might not know about Ingrid's illness. I desperately wanted to tell her, to prompt her to set things right before it was too late. But I didn't know if Ingrid would approve, and I couldn't betray my dearest Ing. So I held my tongue, a lump forming in my throat. Yes? Let's talk again soon, I muttered, upset with myself for letting the moment pass. Life is a chronicle of wasted opportunities. Goodbye, Thomas, was all she said before disconnecting. I felt hollow, hopeless after my conversation with Emma, and I was still no closer to discovering what happened that day. Each of us had very different recollections. Which of us was right? Were we all mixed up? I decided to explore a little further. From what I could discern on the internet, the Marcy Hotel was indeed in Lake Placid, not Alexandria Bay. And there are no Safeway supermarkets in New York State, nor have there ever been. On the other hand, there are Price Choppers in Lake Placid, Alexandria Bay, and Lake George. I scoured through old family photo albums. My mother had been an avid photographer and the unofficial curator of our family history. She left behind 8 thick ivory-colored photo albums chronicling all our major events, milestones, holidays, and family vacations. When she passed, Ingrid and I each claimed 4 albums. Emma had not wanted any. The 3 summer vacations were all documented in a single album that remained in my possession, annotated with dates and labels in my mother's efficient script. As I scanned those faded 3x5 snapshots of a bygone era, I beheld my parents in their strength and vigor, Emma before her estrangement, the 5 of us swimming, laughing, smiling as a unit with common purpose, a loving family, whole. Yet the photos shed little light on my quest, save the chronology of our vacations and the reason we all recall different cars. During the summer at Alexandria Bay, both my father's gray sedan and my mother's cherry red station wagon made their appearance in the photos. No doubt my mother must have driven us first, to be joined a day or 2 later by my father when he could get away from work. A year later in Lake Placid, we appeared to be driving a baby blue sedan that I did not recognize. Perhaps that was the loaner that Emma had referred to. The following year, when we traveled to Lake George, only my father's sedan was in evidence. There was nothing to indicate which of the summers the incident took place, what my parents had been doing at the office, or what it all meant. So each of us had misremembered key elements of the story. Were our recollections the product of our own personalities? The lenses we brought with us, our lives ever since? Did they stem from the different stories we told ourselves afterwards? Had we all remembered only fragments of the truth and then reconstructed our memories to tell a coherent story? In any event, we were all unreliable witnesses. I found this terribly troubling. Did this mean the past was simply unknowable? Are all our memories simply fabrications or reconstructions, like books based on true events? Now that my parents were dead, was there nothing I could hold on to that was true and certain? I guess I'll never know what happened on that trip. In some ways, I feel farther from the truth than when I started. I can't even say why it matters to me so much. What was I hoping to find anyway? Some kind of fight? An affair? A miscarriage? Would learning anything of that nature truly make me any happier? Perhaps they're entitled to their secrets, even in the grave. The idyllic youth I believe I had is gone. My parents are gone. Emma too has departed, although by her own choice. These will never return. All that remains, aside from faded photographs and broken memories, is my beloved Ing, my anchor, my protector, my Polaris. I suppose all I can do is treasure her while I can, before her flame too is forever extinguished from my firmament. Questions, reactions, comments?
You definitely did your research, Mad Magazine.
Yeah, I actually had to wipe up ice cream from a car in order to.
That was a wonderful story.
Yeah.
So I like that a lot. I
May
think
I
it
have
gets.
your attention, please? The library will be closing in 30 minutes. Please make your final selection and bring it to the service desk. Check out. We'll reopen tomorrow at 10 a.m.
So, yeah, so that, I mean, I really love the theme of broken memory because I'm a part-time historian and not a full-time historian. I study international relations and I have 3 degrees from the political science and history departments, and I do a lot of archival research and a lot of interview-based work. And I have to deal with this idea of broken memory, of fragments of evidence that has been distorted, and I'm trying to put together details of events that are of great importance to my research, but that I can't necessarily put together to build Humpty Dumpty again. And that's really problematic. And it gets me, when I do interview-based work, I think about this idea of broken memory. I often hear things from people that I know are simply not true. And I don't think it's because they're deliberately deceiving me. I think that often it's because they're talking about something that happened 15, 20 years ago, and that they may remember differently or may have forgotten and filled in details. So I think a lot about memory. And then, so I think a lot about that in general, and then conversation with my brother at one point about a summer vacation actually got me thinking in those terms as well. And that's how this story was born and allowed me to create certain characters and certain character dynamics that fortunately don't exist in my own family. And so I kind of like that story.
And so it's interesting here, it's not surprising that someone, roughly our age is writing this because, you're thinking of their own childhood. But there's almost like 2 memories going on here, right? There's the specific question of what happened on that day in that car, whatever. And then there's the, how do we remember our childhood? Right, which is a much more kind of generic, not generic, but right, just kind of the mood that you carry with you through life. It's sort of like what was it like being a kid with mom, dad, siblings. And like what's interesting, what I like about this is it sort of is playing with both of those. And it very much reminds me of like when you talk to, one of the reasons I like talking to, so my father had no siblings who survived, so like the only thing we knew about his past was through him, but like talking to my mother's siblings or cousins or whatever, like you're getting the family history told from like a different perspective, and like, right, like, some like seminal events are the same, but like both the specific memories and like the whole gestalt, like what were my grandparents like? What were their parents like? It's just like totally different and fed through, the personality, right? So like one sibling, no one was wealthy in Israel in the 40s. But one sibling says, yeah, but it was great, I was happy. And the other one is like always talking about the deprivation of the poverty. And it was really both true, right? But just like completely different memories. So I really like that because, you have like the 3 siblings who are sort of each telling it in their own way. And they're like bouncing back between a given day and a kind of really, how are we like canonizing our parents?
And it's consequential too, because you see that their personalities, in a sense, have been shaped by their worldviews of their past and the stories they've told them. So that's exactly the kind of dynamic that I was trying to bring out. And so I like the way you're resonating with it, and you see that in your own life. That because that is, we have to tell ourselves stories of the past, because the past is gone, and we keep it alive only through these living stories, but they're living, so they grow and they change and they alter.
And one of the things just, that after my father died, I realized that, there's only gonna be, somewhere between, I don't know, 5 and 10 canonized stories. That's just the way it is. So it's sort of like, pick them well, right? Because at the end of the day, after a certain time, a child, let's say, to a parent, is gonna carry around like a couple of traits, a couple of things, right? So like, and those are constructed, obviously don't like make them up, but like, rather than let those happen, be more conscious, right? Of like, how you want to do that.
Right, the one thing that I find with my own kids is that whatever I may try to pass
you have no
on,
control.
they remember like the most, like for me, the most bizarre things, because it's not, because they saw it as a kid.
What flavor of ice cream is that?
Right, they saw it as a kid, and it's like, and they say, well, don't you remember this? And I like, no, of course, because as an adult, it's not important at all. And so, but it's terribly important to them, and it is terribly important that they understand the story in those terms. And so it's hard actually to structure what gets remembered as far as that goes.
With kids, it's often things that are catastrophes that get remembered. We had a wonderful family trip to Disney World when my kids were younger. The things they remember were that we listened to the Indian in the cupboard the whole ride down, and that Michael left a package of crayons on the back seat of the minivan, and they melted, and I was thinking about your ice cream.
Yes. So that's it. I mean, what you're paying attention to and what matters to you shapes what you remember
And
too.
my boys are in their 30s and early 40s, and if you ask them about Disney World now, that's what they'll tell you.
Good thing you spent all that money.
Yeah. We'll often ask our kids, do you remember this trip, or thanks for coming. Did you fill out a, so, we'll often ask our kids, do you remember this? Do you remember? No, I don't remember that. I don't remember that. It doesn't matter, so. Other thoughts, questions?
It just makes me think, I never thought about this before, that the event is a one-time thing, whatever the event is. And it may have an objective reality, but once it's gone, everything else is subjective. Right, all the memories are subjective. There is no ultimate answer to what happened. Because there's only a discussion, because it doesn't exist anymore.
There can be no objective answer to the question, what happened? Something did happen, and it did happen in a particular way. Now, it's true that meant different things to different actors, to different people who were involved in that, and different witnesses. But something did happen. I mean, there was a truth in this story, presumably, that there was a particular car, it was a particular trip that did happen. But we could just never get to it anymore. There's no way we're ever going to find out what that was. And so we have to reconcile ourselves to an imperfect rendering of the past. And it's disturbing because we like to think we remember this, I remember this, but there's a psychologist at, I think she was at Columbia, who is often called as a witness on legal trials to try to undermine the credibility of witnesses. But basically, she did an experiment that I was thinking of when I wrote this too, but she did a series of experiments where she showed a minor fender bender, a video of a minor fender bender, and then she cued the subjects differently. In the control group, she asked, she used language of what did you see when you saw when you saw the accident? Whereas for the other one, she talked about the car crash and used language that was much more evocative. And what she found afterwards, when she cued them later, she asked, what did you see at the scene? Did you see broken glass? And only about 20% that got the normal treatment saw broken glass, because there was no broken glass in this minor fender bender. But 80% of those who were in the experimental group who had language of car crash, when the car smashed into the other one, I think she used language of that sort. 80% remember seeing glass, which they couldn't possibly have remembered because there wasn't glass in the video. And so she shows how malleable memories are and how the stories you tell, the framing, the cueing affects our ability to remember even something pretty basic and something pretty recent, because they had just seen those videos maybe a half an hour earlier. So I was definitely thinking about that. The past, there is a past. It did exist. It was something real, and there is an objective past. We just can't access it. That's the problem. We'll never be able to access the objective past unless somehow or other we were to find some video that was taken at the time and we can actually play the events. And so I think we have to understand memory as something more problematic, more fluid, more subjective, and more in flux. And what you remember of the same event in 10 years may be very different from what you remember of the event today. We're all, and the other thing is that it's also a product of our lenses, which are constantly shifting and growing. And so what I focus on now about this story that I may tell my kids about the past may have a lot to do with who I am now and what I'm focused on. Whereas if I tell it to them in 10 years, my concerns may be very different and my understanding of the event may be very different. And so I do think there's something about memory that tells us, the imperfect nature of memory that tells us something about being human, frankly, and who we are.
You're going to hate where I'm taking you, but my recent work with ChatGPT tells me the same thing about cueing. So if you ask ChatGPT in a certain way, it will tell you certain things. If you ask it other. And I'm wondering if running that experiment from the psychologist would bring something similar, because ChatGPT would, associate it with some broken glass in a picture. So you get me some research ideas actually.
Well, I mean, I'm interested in humans, human beings. I'm not interested in machines or artificial intelligence as far as that goes. But I think we are at the end of our allotted time. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming in and learning about my please let me ask you to fill something out here, and we will do a quick drawing for a copy of Songbook.